Everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar in what is indeed a very unsettling time for businesses across. I'm John Quinton Barber, founder of Social, a communications agency in Manchester, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar, which is being hosted by the Growth Company and the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Lou Cordwell, Co-Chair of Greater Manchester Local Economic Partnership, and Mark Hughes, Chief Executive of the Growth Company. Over the next hour, we're going to be highlighting what financial and practical support is available for businesses in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be discussing the issues and challenges still affecting businesses and highlighting some of the positive news stories about how Greater Manchester businesses are responding responsibly to the crisis. But before we begin, I just want to add a personal note. I too am a business owner with 40 colleagues to look after, and I've got a huge amount of empathy for everybody who's on this call today. Please do get engaged with today's webinar. It's here to help people like you and I. So without further ado, good afternoon, Andy, Lou and Mark.
Afternoon.
It's really great to have you on the webinar, and I think just before we dive into the topics, I'm just going to ask each of you just to give me a couple of minutes on today's theme, which is supporting businesses through the COVID-19 pandemic. So Andy, it's okay if I start with you. Andy? Lou, let me start with you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Technology is brilliant.
Yeah, it's all great when it works. Yeah. Gonna have to get used to that. Yeah, so I think obviously, you know, as you've already highlighted, this is kind of unprecedented times for all of us in every sense, and I think whilst we've all often, you know, worked through recessions before, and we're aware of the challenges that brings, I don't think any of us have ever been in a situation of this magnitude, and in a situation where it's every sector, it seems, every stage of business, every age of business, whether you're a startup or you're an established corporate. And then on top of that, we've all, of course, not just got our business worries, we've got our social and family worries and our health concerns. So I think it's an incredibly stressful time for everybody, and certainly what we're experiencing in Greater Manchester and the kind of family and colleagues that we're speaking to on an hourly basis, it seems, not just daily, is that it's changing every day. We're seeing changing advice from government, we're seeing changing situations and changing concerns. So whilst it feels like we've been doing this a long time, it's actually really very early days in the situation. I think obviously through the LEP and myself as a business owner, I'm spending a huge amount of my time talking to other businesses of different sectors, different stages. There are definitely some universal themes which I imagine we're going to hear today. And the phase I think we're in at the moment is dealing with the immediacy and the urgency, and with one eye on the fact that at some point we do need to get to recovery and making sure we've got the plan. I think our strengths as a city region are always our strengths, which are our ability to collaborate, our ability to be good human beings and look after one another when we really need it. And we're seeing some amazing kindness. Our ingenuity, our ability to be creative, to come up with ideas, to be entrepreneurial. And you're seeing that through the GM team and some of the work that Mark's team are doing. The amazing tenacity that already is being shown from those people who are working evenings, weekends, you know, everybody's email is working around the clock. And our ability to work public and private together to make sure that as a private sector we're supporting our social responsibility, but as a public sector, you know, we're also supporting the really important private sector and the valuable role that they play in providing people with a livelihood and with jobs. So certainly at the moment, myself and the LEP, we're straddling all of those things and walking hand in hand really with our colleagues at GM to try and very quickly move into some solution delivery.
Thank you. That's a great intro. Andy, I'm going to come over to you now just to ask you to give us a couple of minutes about you know, the theme of today, supporting businesses through this pandemic. Okay. Andy? Okay. Can you hear me, Andy? Okay, we're having a few technical problems there. I'm going to go straight to you, Mark. Mark, can you give me a couple of minutes?
Yeah. I mean, Lou's done an amazing job of describing the situation. So in many respects, it's really hard to add to what Lou said. I think from our perspective, we're clearly in the zone of supporting businesses. It's useful to note, again, we are a social enterprise ourselves, so we are a business. And we're going through a lot of at the same time as trying to help businesses, we're going through a lot of the dynamics that businesses are going through right now. So we're making use of some of the government schemes whilst at the same time providing direct support for businesses. So we've been active since the 1st of March. We went live with our initial response to COVID-19 on the 1st of March, which centered on expanding the hours of our operations, going live with a new website, putting self-help guides on there, running webinars. So we were quite early, I think, out there in terms of responding to business needs. That obviously needs to change now. And again, as Lou has said, we're probably going to go through different phases of this situation. We're probably about to move into another stage, certainly on the health side, which will have a corresponding impact on the economic side. And whilst there is a real focus beginning to be on what the recovery will look like, I think we've also got to think about what happens when we wean off the government schemes. So how do we come off this safety net that the government has put in place for some businesses? I know there'll be many businesses that feel they've been excluded from this safety net, but there's a large number being held in this position for right now. So how we ease off on that, the timing and the process, again, I think will be really important during the next weeks and months.
Thank you, Mark. And that reminds me to say to everybody who's on the webinar today, please do get your questions in. We'll be asking the questions to the panel. I'm sure there's going to be lots of them. And it's really important you do. Andy, I'm going to come over to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, John?
Just give us a
Say again, sorry, John, I lost you then.
About supporting business through the pandemic. Just a couple of minutes in.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks everybody for joining. So I've just chaired the third meeting of the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee today, which is a broad group of our leaders, NHS leaders, police, fire, but also the LEP. So Mo ISAP was on the meeting today. The truth of the matter is we've got a very tough month ahead of us from a health crisis point of view, but also behind it, not far behind it, an economic crisis, and we're very conscious of these two things together. Obviously, the health of our residents has to take top priority, but we know that long-term health is also about people having jobs to go back to. So everything that Lou and Mark have said, I fully endorse. We want to help you all through this as much as we possibly can. We know cash flow is a massive issue for you all right now, and we're trying our best to help. The councils, I think, have stood up their small grant scheme. Obviously, it's bedding in, and be pleased to hear any feedback today from colleagues on the webinar. But we know we've got more to do. Where I can really come in is helping with advocacy at a national level, and I have been doing that. We were pressing the government to put in place the employee retention scheme, the furlough scheme, and that in the end got to where we wanted it to get to. We also then were calling for more support for self-employed people, and that pretty much got to where we wanted it to get to, but it left a gap in terms of the newly self-employed. And just to say that I've been briefing the press today that I'm going to write to the Chancellor, well, pretty much now, actually, I've just signed off the letter, calling for more support for the newly self-employed. The proposal we're putting to the government is that 1920 tax returns be allowed to be submitted now in the same way that they're allowing an extension on the 1819 tax returns. We see no reason why that can't be allowed to support people who are often perhaps in a more vulnerable position, only having recently become self-employed. So that might be younger people, but it also might be older people who've taken an entrepreneurial leap and used savings, etc. So we think there's still a gap there, and it's my job obviously to advocate for everybody, and that's what I'm trying to do in as constructive a way as I possibly can with the government. So, John, I'll just say finally, colleagues have already mentioned it. While we are going to dig in for a tough month, and that's where our primary focus is, part of my mind is beginning to think about recovery, and it's also beginning to think about a fiscal stimulus that we might be able to ask the government to help us with. So, you know, kind of hearing from colleagues what you would like to see in any such package to kickstart the economy, because we really will need to do that coming out of this. Then, you know, I'd be very grateful to hear suggestions so that I can then put those to the government. But those are just a few opening thoughts from me, John.
Thank you, Andy. And I think I speak on behalf of everybody who's on the webinar and also businesses across the city region that the speed of the response across this city has been fantastic, and we want to thank you for that. Just for colleagues, people who are on the webinar, there's going to be 3 parts to this. Part 1, we're going to talk financial and practical support available for businesses in response to the pandemic. And the second part is about issues and challenges still affecting businesses. So while you're listening, please do get your questions in. I'll turn to them. With the wonders of technology, I'm going to be getting them on my iPhone. So if I'm looking down and not being rude, I'm just picking up some questions and ensuring I field them accordingly. And at the end, we'll, you know, there is a bit of hope. There's hope here. We'll talk about some of those businesses, those great businesses in Greater Manchester that are actually doing some good work right now. So that's it. So I'm going to turn to you, Mark, first, Chief Executive of Growth Company, just to ask you to provide a bit of an overview of the financial support that the government has introduced for businesses and the ways in which that can be accessed.
The government has put in place. Each of them have eligibility criteria and processes around them, and I'm sure there'll be questions and reflections on those, but I'll just quickly go through them. So you've got the main loan scheme, which is actually available to probably around about 99% of businesses in Greater Manchester, because it's available to all businesses up to 45 million turnover. So the vast majority of businesses can access that loan scheme. There are issues within it. Getting hold of some of the lenders, potential lenders at the moment, takes quite some time, as it were. There are some concerns about some of the criteria being attached to those loans, but I think it's also important to note that for the first 12 months of those loans, there's no interest or fees payable, and indeed there could be a capital repayment holiday for that amount of period as well. So it's really important to explore that option. And again, you say earlier things are changing quite quickly overnight. The question of personal guarantees for loans below 250,000 was removed across the board. Different banks had been applying different criteria, but that has now been removed by the British Business Bank. So the loan scheme is available to most businesses within Greater Manchester. Then you've got the business rate scheme and the business rate relief and the grants associated with that. That's available to about 45% of properties across Greater Manchester. The key point there is that it's based on properties rather than the business. And again, there are some issues coming through around who is the actual rate payer, as opposed to the occupier of some of that property. As Andy just mentioned, we can confirm that more than half of Greater Manchester local authorities have already made payments under that scheme as of today. So the money is finally beginning to flow. And of course, the local authorities have been waiting in some senses for the money to come from national government on that. The third scheme, again, Andy's already touched on this, is the self-employment support scheme. There are about 150,000 self-employed people, sole traders, partners in Greater Manchester. So in one sense, they are catered for, apart from some of the eligibility parts that Andy mentioned. I think there's also another group of people who are sort of missed in this area, where there's about 10,000 people who are registered as companies rather than sole traders, but they're the only employee in that company, and so they view themselves as a sole trader, but they're not legally defined as a sole trader, and there's a gap missing there as well that probably needs to be filled. And then the last one, which is the one that really covers the most employees in Greater Manchester is the job retention scheme, or the furlough scheme, if you want to call it that. That is applicable to all private sector businesses in Greater Manchester. We have around about 1 million employees, private sector employees within Greater Manchester, and that scheme is available to those people. Again, there are some detailed issues within the application of it, but that's the fourth main scheme. I think there are some other administrative changes that the government has made that probably are worth calling out. So they're not about cash and money at the moment, but you've got the deferral of the VAT and the self-assessment activity. You've got changes taking place around insolvency, which will give some added flexibility. You've got the time to pay initiatives with HMRC, and you've also got the protection around tenants in commercial properties as well, at least for 3 months. So there's more in that area as well. So you've got 4 main schemes around cash and grants, and then you've got at least 4 to 6 administrative changes that should also be helpful for business as well. And those are the national schemes. In terms of Greater Manchester, I don't know if we can come on to that separately, John.
Yeah, no, I think Mark, that's useful from the national picture. And I'd like to say, 4 weeks ago, none of this would have been ever thought about, would it? So, we are in unprecedented times here. Lou, I want to turn to you, Lou, just to give us an overview about the LEP's response to the business support that's been announced so far. Let me unmute you.
Yeah, so obviously, we're in a phase where the problem right under our nose at the minute is cash for businesses, and so what we're focused on is I guess trying to support on helping people to access the support from government that's been made available as Mark's describing, and also fairly quickly to identify any gaps and see where GM needs to plug specific gaps and is able to do that. That said, whilst we welcome the support, there are some aspects we're lobbying quite hard on that we don't think are quite right yet, and where we need to just bend the schemes or just look to alternative solutions. So just to give you an indication of what those things are, we know that there is an issue with access to some of that government-backed loan finance at the moment. Mark's already talked about this. We've heard about personal guarantees, and we've pushed very hard to make the case that really shouldn't be a restriction. And we've raised that over the last week as a matter of urgency with government. We are seeing some movement on that, so that's positive. And also some concerns over the eligibility criteria. We think need to just be revisited in order to give people access. But generally, part of the issue there is just the pace and how quickly we can get people, even the banks, to deal with their own customers, let alone potentially future customers that are not being serviced by their own banks or have not had the conversation. The self-employed problem, and in particular, we're pushing quite hard on those who've been trading for less than 12 months and how we provide support and how that's considered moving forward. And there is a real issue, we think, around the flexibility in the job scheme. So, the kind of very black and white, all or nothing. And actually, particularly as we move into recovery phase, support around partial return to work is going to be really important, in that actually there are cases where organisations would benefit from those employees not being completely out of the business, but they're 2 or 3 days a week. Can that be supplemented? Can that be supported, particularly as we try and bring them back into the business? And we've also still got this issue around clarifying what's regarded as an essential business, therefore who stays open, who should close, real muddiness, and we do need some clarity fairly quickly.
Interesting, Lou. So we have a question coming in about that. So after we've had Andy's update, we'll go straight to the questions, and there's a question right about that as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Andy, I'm not going to unmute you. I'm going to let the that's it. We're good. Andy, can you tell us how the public sector is working together to support the business community?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, John. Well, we're trying to do everything we can to support people, recognising how tough this is. So some of the funding that we hold at a Greater Manchester level, we've been releasing. We certainly did that to arts and culture organisations a couple of weeks ago. We've been having a bit of a debate about bus funding at the moment, because there are no bus companies are dependent on funding that comes via Transport for Greater Manchester. So we've released funding to bus companies today earlier than we would ordinarily have done. We did pay them in full for March, and we've released further funding to them today. So we are trying to help where we can to ensure continuity. But of course, we also need help from business, if I could put it that way, John. Let's take buses. The requirement around journeys now has changed, given that we need to focus on key workers and getting them to particularly hospital sites, but other key sites, but also essential work as well. So the requirements of the transport system have changed with the new reality that we're all living through. In terms of what else we're doing, I mean, it's in some ways small, but we're working with our nighttime economy advisor, Sasha Lord, and we are launching on Friday a new streaming service called United We Stream, which is a platform for Greater Manchester talent, musicians particularly, but others as well. This is encouraging people to obviously lighten up their confinement on a Friday night in their home with some live performances. But the funding raised through the website will go to support the nighttime economy predominantly. So 70% of revenues raised will go to support operators within the nighttime economy who might be struggling at the moment. So, I mean, there's more I could say. I mean, we are trying where we can to release the funding that we have and to think of new ways in which we can support people. But it's, of course, difficult when we're facing all the challenges that we've got within the National Health Service and within our councils. But in many ways, we're going to come on to it later, but as well as us helping business, we're so grateful for the amount of help that business is giving to us, coming forward with fantastic offers of support across the board. So yeah, it's an evolving picture, John, but where we can, we want to release GM held funding to help businesses.
Thank you. I say again, the speed of response has just been amazing, and the initiatives that are coming out. So again, a month ago, who'd have thought where we would be today? I've got a question, and the first question I'm going to put to you, Andy, because I know you've been tweeting about this a lot. It's about business keeping businesses open. So I'm just going to read it out. Should I be keeping my business running if I can let most people work from home and make sure that those who still have to come into the workplace can observe the social distancing and public health requirements? For example, I'm worried about the risks for staff who use public transport.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. It's a tough one, isn't it? And I bet every business is going through this at the moment. Let me just kind of explain the way I see this, if I can, John. This first and foremost is a public health crisis, a global pandemic. So I think in this moment, my primary concern has to be for the health of the residents of Greater Manchester. So for their health individually, but also our health collectively, because if we allow this virus to spread too much, then it will place a burden on our NHS that it can't cope with, and then we will all be at risk. So it is, in my view, primarily a health crisis. And that must come first, I think, in the judgment about the extent to which we can keep people working. Of course, we want to keep people working if they can, but there is an if there. Now, I know businesses will be going through this consideration. The government's judgment was that if people can work while observing the safe distancing, they should do. The issue I have had relayed to me is a lot of employees saying that they feel unsafe at work. Now, it would be one thing if people were saying, "Oh, we're just trying to find issues to sort of to raise and all the rest of it." But this is a real issue. There are lots of people who are concerned about their safety in the workplace. Because bear in mind, some of these employees may have children who have disabilities or underlying conditions, or they may live in the same home as elderly parents. So it isn't just what happens in the workplace. They may be very worried about what they may bring back from the workplace into their family home. So we have had a significant number of complaints that the workplace isn't observing safe distancing or providing the sanitizer or hand washing facilities. So I think where this gets to is a judgment for each individual company. There are some that have been told they must close, but for most of the others, it's their own judgment. And I could see Jonathan Foreman's put a question in, John, saying that the government says practice social distancing where possible. It's true, it does say where possible. In our view, it shouldn't say where possible. In my view, as a former health secretary, that should be, if you can't operate safe social distancing, you really shouldn't be open, because in my view, people's health has to come first here. And I don't believe it is the CMO's advice that where businesses can't operate it, people should still go to work. The social distancing has to apply, in my view, wherever people are at the moment. We've got to stop this thing spreading. And the more we stop it spreading, the quicker we'll be able to allow the economy to bounce back. It's a really complex judgment, but I hope colleagues on the call will understand I have a responsibility for the health of the population, and there are some of our residents who feel that they are at risk in the workplace. And I know it's a minority of operators, and some of the ones we've contacted have made changes on the back of the concerns expressed. But there can't be a complacency on this issue, I don't think, because this month is going to be very, very tough indeed in terms of the increased infection rate, the increased death rate, and the pressure on our hospitals.
Andy, thank you. We appreciate what you're doing in this sector, in this space, because it is, as I say, it's very unprecedented. It's fast moving, and yes, we appreciate that. I'm going to come to you, Mark, with a question around about banks. There's a question coming in saying, have banks and local authorities actually started issuing loans and grants to businesses yet? And how will the discretionary payments be applied by local authorities?
Okay, can I just make a general point, John? So I'm watching the questions go up on the screen as well, and there's a huge number and variety, and I don't think we're going to get to them all in this session.
No.
I would really just say to people, we have the Growth Hub. It is available extended hours in the week. It is available on the weekend, with people answering the phone, as it were. So if we don't get to the question, please go to Growth Hub website and telephone there. There are also a range of other business representative organisations, Chamber, FSB, that are all there to help businesses at the moment as well. In relation to your question around payments, as it were, as I said earlier, had confirmed this morning, local authorities in GM have started to make payments to businesses today. Some were yesterday, today, and most should have started by the end of the week, as it were. I can't confirm the position on the banks as to whether they're actually making loans at the moment, because we won't see the statistics on that until next week, is when we'll get the first position on that. We are actually an operator of the loan scheme ourselves as well. So we have a small business loan operation within the group. We will be making our first loans through the scheme this week as well. And I can confirm that, because I know a couple are going through for approval today, as it were. So like I say, the money is flowing, but we won't see any big numbers until next week.
Just another question, I think another topic that's really key to people is about furloughing. So just on this, I've got a question saying, we are supporting small businesses from a HR perspective. Many have furloughed staff that don't have the cash flow to pay April salaries. They've applied for the loan grant where they can, but are concerned they won't have enough cash in time to fulfill April's payroll. What can be done?
Yeah, it's a really, really tricky situation that I think at the moment it has to be that conversation about the loan scheme or other types of finance that the bank will make available to you. It's really, really unfortunate, to say the least, that the government's not been able to move quicker, so that money was paid at the beginning of the month and not at the end of the month, because midway through the month is when the payroll hits, as it were. And I think any calls and any pressure that we can individually or collectively put on government to try and speed that up has to be done, because I think we are going to lose companies, and we are going to lose people in employment for the sake of 2-3 weeks possibly of cash flow.
And again, that is something that I'm hearing as well, and it's something that, you know, is it a case of just having the processes in place to deal with the inquiries? The volume must be huge.
Yeah.
So it's that. Coming to you, Lou, as well. Just if you've got anything to add to that about the furloughing scheme, and you know, there's a question here about does it cover staff who've just started? You know, it doesn't cover staff who's just started. You know, quite a few people started a new job in March. So have you got anything to add to that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the pressure points are there's still the ambiguity under the headlines around legal process, HR process. You know, so a lot of organisations, even with in-house HR functions, but an SME level, of course, you know, we all normally rely on experts. Of course, nobody's really an expert on these things. So, yeah, so I think that's where Lean on the Growth Company, who can give some of that advice on process and at least share what we do know from government. I think there is a legitimate point around speeding up the access. So end of April to receive that money from government for a lot of organisations is presenting real challenges, because what they're having to do is make decisions around you know, if they apply for some of the government-backed loans to help bridge that gap, they're having to make judgment calls on whether they believe they will qualify. You know, so
Right.
Are they going to wait that 3 to 4 weeks? You know, so I think it's the general ambiguity under it that none of us quite know as businesses when we're going to get that. We're trying to follow what we believe is best practice, but really that's quite undefined because nobody's really done this process. Nobody even knew really what the word furlough meant 4 weeks ago, you know, so we'll learn new language and it's very difficult, you know, so I think legal guidance would really help. But as much, and certainly from a LEP perspective, you know, one of the things we will continue to lobby hard on is speed of the process. So it's not just knowing that it's there, but it's making sure that companies are following best practice process, because the risk is without that, they don't furlough, they just lay people, that they just remove people from the business.
Yes.
And the whole point of the scheme is we want to keep as many people in employment as possible. One, because that's the right thing to do, and two, because that will help recovery on the other side. So knowing that we've got those people that we can quickly bring back into the business, especially industries like mine where there's already a talent shortage, you know, you want to be able to bring those people back on board to help with the recovery on the other side of it and give them some continuity, you know, through some income and through some employed, you know. So yeah, concur with that.
Thank you, Lou. Conscious of time, so we're going to go into part 2 of this, and as Mark said earlier on, there's loads of questions coming in, so thank you for that. And if you can't get around to answering or asking all of them and getting answers to all of them, then as Mark said, there's plenty of information on the Growth Company's website, and do keep peeled to that, and I'll come on to that towards the end. Andy, I'm going to come on to you in about 10 minutes to just talk about how businesses are responding to the crisis. But before we go there, I just want to talk about, with Mark and Lou, some of the issues and challenges that are still affecting businesses. So Mark, can you just give us an overview really of some practical support being provided by the Growth Hub for businesses in Greater Manchester, things like remote working, continuity planning, insurance?
Yeah, I think just a kind of recap on key issues, as it were, that businesses right now are presenting, and we're literally dealing with thousands, as it were, over the last few weeks. The vast majority are clearly dealing with decreased sales and therefore cash flow, and that those two intertwined are the overwhelming number of issues. Then it's access to these schemes, you know, and confusion and trying to clear understanding of those schemes. There's also a huge number of businesses trying to, that Andy talked about earlier, which is if they need to operate in this environment, how do they operate in this environment according to public health rules, as it were, because they want to do the right thing, but how do they do it? Because again, there's some vagueness in that area. So those would be top lines. There's lots and lots of others around how do you work virtually in this environment? How do you look after the mental and health and well-being of colleagues in this environment? And unfortunately, how do you deal with insolvency in this environment, as it were? So those are the kind of range of issues that are presenting that to us. I mean, in terms of what we're doing, you know, we do not, unfortunately, have a bundle of cash. You know, it's not that type of support that we have. We can administer the loan scheme, but we're not a grant body, as it were. However, I do have over 100 colleagues in the Growth Hub who are used to providing support and advice to businesses, supplemented, I have to say right now, but by a great deal of support from professional service organisations who are willing to give their time free to businesses at this moment, again, to reflect what Lou has said about people joining together and helping everybody else out at the moment. So, you know, what I would say to people, the worst thing to do right now is to try and sort of keep it close to yourself and solve the problem yourself. Reach out to your friend, reach out to your business advisor, reach out to the Growth Hub, reach out to a business representative organization. Please do engage with somebody, because there will be a way, you know, there will be a way forward. It may not be the way that you want to go forward in an ideal situation, but there will be a way forward that you can move a few steps forward. Websites are brilliant, as it were, and we're all getting even more IT literate these days, as it were. But you know, I think it's also important to have human beings to talk to as well, particularly in this situation. So, you know, that's why we've upped our resources on our contact center. We've extended the hours of operation of our contact center, so people can actually talk to people directly in the contact center. And then we have a large bank of additional advisors who, you know, have had to be fair, adjust their knowledge and their advice, but we have a whole team of people that are used to helping businesses adopt digital technologies, adopt agile work practices, and they are extremely busy at this moment in time.
And so, Mark, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think the key message there I would say to everybody who's online now is, if you haven't accessed the Growth Company Business Growth Hub, please do. There's a huge amount of support out there for you. And again, the speed at which that's being mobilized is very impressive. Lou, I want to come to you to talk about mental health and well-being, because there's a question come in here about how can I support my staff with their mental health whilst they're working from home? And also, just to segue into that, we are also seeing many business owners and leaders displaying mental health challenges. How can we support business leaders too?
Yeah, so interestingly, we were having this very conversation this morning, because I think it's the other part of the well-being kind of triangle, which is obviously we're all incredibly concerned, rightly so, about you know, the virus and the kind of physical symptoms, but for the vast majority of people, there's a whole level of stress that they've never dealt with before, and not only, you know, their work situations, their kind of economic uncertainty, but homeschooling children, having to, you know, learn a set of technologies that might be quite uncomfortable, incredibly unprecedented levels of stress. And so again, one of the businesses that I non-exec for actually is a mental wellbeing organisation who reach into through schools and teachers to teach children resilience and mental wellbeing techniques. Actually, one of the things we're looking at in that business now is that's equally valid now to parents at home as much as it is to employees who are themselves, you know, isolated, not getting the social contact they normally get, or worried about their own uncertainty, you know, their own uncertain futures. So I think, I know we through the GM conversation that we were having this morning, we're going to be exploring that from a Greater Manchester level. How can we support that through not just the dialogue with teachers and with children and with parents, but also through employees? Because actually I think the same problem happens, and there are some amazing online learning platforms and online learning techniques that we can use to just begin to educate and create some tools and techniques that are perhaps a bit unfamiliar to people. But also I think Mark's point around communication. So what I'm seeing just being pulled together by actually quite a lot of professional advisors are doing this quite well at the moment, is creating even just simple things like WhatsApp groups for organizations who are going through similar processes. And I think that does two things. I think it helps you to not feel alone, and to actually, you know, that's part of the kind of mental battle, is we're not able to leave our houses, you know, and actually people feel quite isolated. But also sharing best practice, sharing letter pamphlets, sharing, experiences, numbers, bank details, all that kind of stuff that actually people need more than ever. So I think where people can create those micro communities to help one another and just share advice, share guidance, or just be a shoulder to cry on, then I think that's really valuable. But also, I know we're going to be exploring how we can support that through through the kind of online learning platforms that are available and can be reached to, we can reach everyone with those.
I think just to say, now more than ever, do we need our mentors? Do we need our coaches? Do we need our people that we rely on and talk to? It's so important. And it is really, in this time, all about people and people first. And Andy, I've got a question for you about homelessness. I'm going to come into you now in a second. Just say, the question is, would Andy be able to give an update on the homelessness situation and approach for street homeless people across Greater Manchester?
Thanks, John, and thanks for the question, whoever asked it. We released £5 million this time last week to pay for hotel accommodation for all people sleeping rough or who had recently been sleeping rough. The distinction is, obviously, some people were in our shelters across Greater Manchester, but they were not considered to be the right environment. Obviously, shared dormitory accommodation, so we had to move to more suitable accommodation. So it's been a massive job, to be honest. The update that I've just given to the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee is that we've got 500 people accommodated through that scheme in the last week, which, as you said, John, I mean, people are moving mountains here, to be honest. They really are. And we've had lots of good collaboration. Some hotels haven't helped us very much, but others have really stepped up for us, and we're grateful to them. And we're in the process of just sort of getting that scheme bedded in. Tim Heatley, who colleagues may know on the call, chairs the Greater Manchester Mayor's charity. So Tim, obviously MD of Capital and Centric, he launched an appeal yesterday for business support for what we call welfare packages. So while we have, I mean, the 500 will increase, we're going to end up, we think, we're closer to 1,000 people in hotel accommodation. And obviously they need ongoing support while they are there. Food, not fresh food, more dry goods, hygiene products, possibly even IT support, because people need to be in touch with the outside world right now in terms of accessing the advice and finding out what's going on and keeping that social contact. So Tim launched an appeal yesterday, and I would, if I could, through this platform, echo it. If people can help us with any of those kind of things, we don't know how long this will have to last, and we think it's really important that we obviously provide that personal support through this process. So as ever, businesses are being fantastic, though, John. The co-op have stepped forward and helped us a lot already with this scheme. So and we know others are helping too. So we're really grateful. Greater Manchester always steps forward in this way. But in the end, here's one of the beneficial things that may come of this. I think it may, leave a positive legacy with regard to moving forward the homelessness situation. So that's one way of looking at it. But we're making real progress on it with a bit more to do.
Thanks, Andy. I have to say, as a business owner going through and fellow business owners on the call, as we're going through our own pain at the moment, it's really heartening genuinely to see what's happening for others. And that we're always looking through our Twitter feeds for glimmers of hope, them stories that come out, and that is really a fantastic story. So you're rightly, it's about the human spirit. Just got a few more questions that are coming through, which is fantastic. This is really for you, Mark. It's about is there a way our tech companies could tap into furloughed staff from larger companies during the next 3 months where they might not have any work?
Okay, that's an interesting one, because the rules are that if staff are furloughed, they can't take additional economic activity that they will get paid for. They can volunteer for other activity, and if they were already conducting another job, as it were, they can carry on with that job. So there may be an opportunity there, depending on what the purpose to that initiative was directed towards, as it were. But it's actually quite difficult to see a way through it, unless it was, as I say, on some kind of volunteering basis.
Okay, so I think again this could be a moving feast, couldn't it? And these questions are always going to be popping out.
One of the big things around the retention scheme really is the fact that that you can't move people in say to part-time work and then use the retention scheme for the other part-time of their activity, as it were. That would give businesses enormous flexibility and ability to better manage their activity, and it's another area that we're trying to lobby government on changing, although I don't hold out a huge amount of prospect for that one.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We're coming to our last 10 minutes. I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for all the questions that are coming in. There's literally dozens of them. If we don't get around to asking your question, there will be an FAQ posted to the Business Growth Hub website, details of which I'll give out at the end. So please do keep asking them. They're really important that we're hearing from businesses and the struggles and some of the issues that you're telling us about. So if you can't, we've only got 10 minutes left. If you can't answer it right now, they will be answered through an FAQ. So thank you very much. Andy, just to finalise really to you, coming over to you about, this is really, really tough times for everybody. And I mean, extremely tough times. I said at the beginning, I've got a huge amount of empathy for everybody on here. And I have. But also, we're also looking for the positives, and we're looking for those businesses that are actually, they're stepping up to the mark. So, can you just give us an idea of some of the activity being undertaken by businesses across Greater Manchester in response to the social, health and economic crisis? Let me take you off mute.
Thanks very much. It's overwhelming, John, in many ways. Obviously we experienced something similar in May 2017. It's an amazing place, isn't it? Because in moments like this, people step forward and business steps forward, and it has been doing. And I've been inundated with people saying, look, we could switch production to face masks or PPE. We've been celebrating some of our gin companies turning over their production lines to hand sanitizer. I keep warning them that the country does still have a need for gin, so don't go too far. But that's been certainly much appreciated by certainly Greater Manchester Police, who I know have been the recipient of some of that work. There was the companies I mentioned before, the co-op. Others have been helping on the food. I don't think I can announce it here, but there's a major GM homegrown success story that's going to make an announcement tomorrow on the support they're providing. But I'll just give you a taster of that. But it's coming tomorrow, I believe. So I mean, there is just so many big and small, and a lot of the smaller companies are, Slattery's, the bakery in cake shop. That's probably doing them down, isn't it? They're much more than that, of course. In Whitefield, they've been making produce available. So, there are so many names I could mention because there's so many organisations doing so much. But I can't stress to you how much it helps me in my position and how much it matters to see that stuff coming forward. I put an appeal out today, actually, John, if you wouldn't mind me just indulging me 1 second. Testing is clearly becoming the issue nationally in terms of two reasons, isn't it? One, in terms of containing the spread of the virus, identifying those who've got it and then improving the isolation and the tracing of contacts. But of course, also in getting people back to work who have it or are suspected to have had it. So Greater Manchester Police have got 1 in 5 frontline officers off work, either self-isolating or ill at the moment. And we've got to get that testing capacity in to stop the spread, but also to get public service professionals back to work. So what I've said today at the press briefing we did after the committee is that I think we need a national effort on this now. I think the government needs to kind of open up to offers of support more broadly. So if we've got any chemical companies on the line, I think we need to start gathering offers of help here. I've spoken to our universities, or certainly to Dame Nancy Rothwell today. She's saying that there is more lab space, more qualified staff that could be gathered together to support this. So I think that's where we can most help, I think, is being really clear to business about where we really do need your help. So homelessness I've mentioned, and we do need your help in that space. But any of those who've got any relevance towards testing, I would say, please get in touch, because that I think is going to be a major focus for us regionally and nationally throughout the whole of April, as well as the more kind of everyday support of food and those kind of things mean the world. Our food banks are running quite low, or in some cases are running out, and that was something that came through the council leaders today, because we're supplementing the packages that are going to people's homes through donations through food banks. So food donations are going to be very important, because the general public is probably donating a little less than they would ordinarily do because of the concern around supermarkets running out. So there are low stocks in food banks, and our councils do need to access food so they can supplement the parcels that they're sending out to people. So yeah, business has been absolutely brilliant, John. I'm really grateful. But as ever, we're going to have to dig in a bit here, because this isn't going away, I'm afraid, anytime soon. I'm sure you won't like me saying that, but it's a fact. We're going to be doing this for some time, I'm afraid.
I'm going to mute you just while I talk over this, but you'll be pleased to know the impact you're already having on this this webinar, because we've had quite a lot of offers of free help from people who are actually on the webinar today. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to look at how we can collect all that. And I'm going to
yeah. Sorry, just going to come back, John, because I was scrolling the questions and I just meant to say something about this. A huge number of really important questions on there. And I think what's happened is, now that the big issues have been dealt with, or seemingly dealt with, the media's attention has moved off business support a little bit, hasn't it? And it's very much moving on to the NHS now. But I can tell from the questions people are submitting that there's lots of detailed questions which would be beneath the media to get into in some ways, but are nevertheless quite massive for some of the companies who have tuned into this today. So what I would just give a commitment is, I will look through these questions and see if we can, working with the growth company, submit them to ministers to see if we can, kind of aggregate the issues and present a kind of summary of what people have said today, so that ministers are still on top of the detail of some of the bits that they've not yet filled in. But I think there's some really important questions coming through, and I didn't want to look like I was minimising them in any way.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. And absolutely agree with you. There's so many questions coming in that they will be collected together and added to the FAQ as well on the Growth Company's website and Business Growth Hub. So absolutely definite. We're coming towards the end of the webinar. I just want to go back to each of you, just really, because for me, I just want to hear from you what it's personally been like over the last few weeks. Just give me a personal impact on this, and then, to hear from. So I'm going to go straight to you, Lou, on that one.
Okay, yeah, so I'm a business owner. My business is 20 years old this year. We've never faced anything like this. And a parent, living in Trafford here in Manchester. So I think it's kind of terrifying, in many ways, and every day is a different challenge, but incredibly heartening at how, from literally the cul-de-sac that we live on and the amazing humanity that people are showing with dropping food parcels on each other's doorsteps, to making sure that everybody's looked after, all the way through to big business and the ability to collaborate, within the GM family. So I think, we just have to do what we're doing best, don't we? Which is show creativity, show humanity, and show the tenacity that we're actually quite good at, and accept it is going to be an incredibly hard few weeks, few months. But I do think if we work together, we can pull through it. But continuing to kind of be entrepreneurial, which we're very good at, find solutions, and try and be optimistic, which sounds a bit Miss-worldy, but I genuinely don't mean it that way. I mean, we have to find solutions to things, which I'm a designer by trade, and that is what design does. It finds solutions to problems, and there's going to be lots of those, but I'm sure we'll manage.
Well, I was going to ask you, but I think you've answered it. When we come through this, how you feel, that business in Greater Manchester will change. But I think, you've answered that. Going next to you, Mark.
The equal amount of sort of heart-rendering but heartwarming stories alongside each other. I think that's what just stays with you. I think the need for everybody just to be compassionate. And however much we're all frustrated with the situation that we're dealing with, or the person we think we're dealing with, we need to remember that try and think about what that person might be dealing with. You know, their workforce might be 20% down, their systems might be down, and they're trying to help you the best that they can, as it were. So I think the compassion side of it's really important. I think from a business side, sometimes it's just about keeping going, keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep walking, but try and keep your eyes slightly further ahead on the horizon at the same time.
Thanks, Mark. And finally to you, Andy. Let me unmute.
What has it meant on a personal level? Well, before becoming mayor, I was a Greater Manchester MP for 16 years. So, and I've been the mayor for 3 years now. So 20 years in frontline politics. My family said, well, we didn't see you for 20 years, and now you're here all the time. We can't cope with this. So we're all in a new world here. So I've never seen as much of them. I'm broadcasting live to you now from my son's bedroom, and it's a good job I don't pan the camera around. It's it could be cleaner, let's put it that way. So doing all of your business from home, I'm sure we've all been through this, haven't we, in the last few weeks? The dog interrupting meetings and people commenting on everyone's interior design or whatever. It's a different world, isn't it? And we've all been thrown into a different world. I should have been weeks away from a mayoral election, so obviously that was just abandoned. But it's amazing, actually, what has been achieved. I think you've alluded to it once or twice. You know, we only had the first meeting of the GM committee 2 weeks ago, and you know, we had a meeting last week and then another one today, so 3 meetings in total over 2 weeks. Mountains have been moved in that time. I know we're all looking at gaps in the provision, but if we think about it, you know, the things that have been stood up in a short space of time is unbelievable, to be honest. And it just shows what's good about this country, doesn't it? The resilience, the resourcefulness. There is so much, I think, that you see in moments like this that reminds you what a fantastic country we live in, and particularly how lucky we are to live in Greater Manchester. I mean, the way I look at it going forward, I mentioned homelessness, there might be a change for the better. I think at moments like this, when we're all looking out for each other more and all thinking more about the wider perspective, it kind of almost brings a sort of sense of togetherness, isn't it? And I think the country's probably lacked a little bit of that in recent times. I don't know if everybody was out clapping for the NHS, but those who were will have felt, you know, a real surge of emotion on that night when we did that. So, you know, I just have a feeling that, you know, as well as it being challenging, and it really is, we feel for everybody who's ill or whose relatives are in hospital or sadly no longer with us. You know, it's terrible, terrible time. At the same time, I kind of think it reminds us all about what's really important, and in some ways gives us all a kind of stronger sense of purpose as a result of that. So I do believe, although it's tough right now, and it's really tough, and tough for all of the businesses who've joined here today, if we just dig in, help each other get through this, I think in the end we'll come through it as a more united country. And I think there'll be many benefits that we can look to as a result of this pain that we're going through right now. So it's easy to say from now, but you know, we are going to hit the worst month, I think, right now. So everyone needs to be ready for that. But I just said on the press briefing, we are in as good a state of preparedness as we possibly could be for what's about to hit us. The GMNHS has got the capacity. We've got the new Nightingale Hospital being built at Manchester Central, and that will be complete by mid-April, which is an amazing achievement. We've got other plans in place, so we're braced, but we've got a plan basically to deal with what's coming. And so, you know, while it'll be tough, you know, I'm confident that, you know, we'll see the best of Greater Manchester in the weeks ahead. And just like to thank everybody for everything that they're doing. And we will get through this, and we'll be stronger as a result.
Thank you, Andy. Sadly, we're coming to the end of today's webinar, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. You know, there's been some really interesting questions and lots of questions coming through on the feed, and I hope you find the guidance that you've heard comforting and informative. There are a few takeaways from today. I think, you know, it's fair to say it's still fast moving, and there's bound to be still a great deal of uncertainty. But there is support and help at hand, and that's been well articulated on today's webinar by each of our guests. And we've heard about the positive stories too, so let's not lose sight of that. And I would certainly recommend, as I've been saying throughout the webinar, do check the Growth Company's website for all the latest updates, including all the questions that have come and all the answers that will be answered on there. from today's webinar. I'd like to thank our guests, Andy Burnham, Lou Cordwell and Mark Hughes. And I want to take the liberty of saying a huge thank you to you on behalf of the business community for your contributions today and for all that you're doing, providing guidance and support and calm, clear and concise communications. You're definitely giving the city region a big professional hug right now, and we all really appreciate it. And finally, to the Growth Company and Greater Manchester's Local Enterprise Partnership for enabling this webinar to happen. Thank you and goodbye.